Have you noticed how measles has suddenly returned to the headlines? For years, most Americans rarely thought about it. Many assumed it was a disease of the past, something our grandparents worried about, not something that could affect families today. But recently, health officials across the United States have reported outbreaks in multiple communities, leaving many adults asking an important question: should I be worried? The answer isn't simply yes or no. For most people, it depends on one thing that surprisingly few adults know with certainty: whether they're actually protected against measles. And if you're over 40, that question may be more important than you realize. I'm Dr. John, and in today's video, we're going to separate facts from fear. We'll explain why measles is making a comeback, who is truly at risk, how this virus spreads so easily, and what practical steps you can take to protect yourself and your loved ones. This isn't about creating panic. It's about understanding the science so you can make informed decisions with confidence. And make sure you stay until the end, because later I'll explain why your year of birth could tell your doctor more about your measles protection than you might expect, and whether it's worth checking your vaccination history. So first, let's answer the biggest question. Why is measles coming back after all these years? For decades, measles was considered one of public health's greatest success stories. After the measles vaccine became widely available, cases dropped dramatically across the United States. In fact, around the year 2000, health officials declared that continuous spread of measles had been eliminated in the country. But eliminated never meant the virus disappeared from the world. Measles still exists in many countries, and international travel allows infected individuals to bring the virus into communities where people may not be fully protected. Normally, these imported cases remain isolated. The problem begins when the virus encounters groups of people with low immunity. Think of it this way: a single spark won't usually start a wildfire if the ground is wet, but when conditions are dry, that same spark can spread quickly. Measles works in a very similar way. When most people in a community are immune, the virus struggles to move from one person to another. But when enough people aren't protected, the virus suddenly finds opportunities to spread. That's exactly what health officials have been seeing during recent outbreaks. It's important to understand that this doesn't mean measles has somehow become stronger. The virus hasn't suddenly changed into something new. Instead, it's simply finding more opportunities to infect people who don't already have immunity. And that's an important difference, because opportunities can often be prevented. Many people are surprised to learn just how contagious measles really is. When someone has the flu or a common cold, you usually think about standing close to a person who's coughing or sneezing. Measles is different. If an infected person coughs inside a room and then leaves, tiny virus particles can remain in the air for as long as 2 hours under certain indoor conditions. That means another person could walk into the same room much later and still be exposed without ever seeing the infected individual. That's one reason public health officials respond so quickly whenever a measles case is confirmed. It's not because every exposure leads to illness. It's because measles is exceptionally efficient at spreading when people lack immunity. In fact, doctors consider it one of the most contagious viruses known to medicine. Understanding this helps explain why outbreaks can grow much faster than many other infectious diseases. So, what actually happens after the virus enters your body? Most infections announce themselves fairly quickly: a sore throat, a cough, a fever. Measles takes a different approach. The virus usually enters through your nose or throat and quietly begins multiplying before your immune system fully recognizes what's happening. During these early days, most people feel completely normal. They continue going to work, running errands, seeing friends and family, traveling, living life as usual. But behind the scenes, the virus is multiplying rapidly. Eventually, your immune system recognizes the infection and launches its defense. By that point, however, the virus has already spread throughout the body. And that's one reason measles is so difficult to control. This is one of the most important facts many people don't realize. With many illnesses, people stay home because they know they're sick. Measles doesn't always give you that opportunity. A person can spread the virus before the classic rash ever appears. At first, they may simply think they have a mild cold or are feeling a little run down. nothing seems unusual. So they go to work, visit the grocery store, attend family gatherings, or board an airplane. Only later do the more recognizable symptoms begin. That's why health officials work quickly whenever someone is diagnosed with measles. By the time the rash develops, several other people may have already been exposed. Early recognition is one of the most effective tools we have for limiting further spread. Imagine this situation. A traveler unknowingly carries measles while feeling perfectly healthy. They pass through a busy airport, visit restaurants, stay in hotels, and spend time around hundreds of other people. Most of those people are protected. Nothing happens. But if the virus reaches someone without immunity, the chain of transmission can begin again. That new person may also feel fine for several days while unknowingly exposing others. This is why outbreaks sometimes seem to appear suddenly. In reality, the virus has often been spreading quietly before anyone realizes it's there. The good news is that modern medicine has very clear recommendations for handling these situations. Knowing your immune status and acting quickly after a possible exposure can make a significant difference. But before we talk about prevention, there's another question we need to answer. How would you even recognize measles in the first place? Because despite its reputation, the illness doesn't actually begin with the symptom most people expect. And understanding those early warning signs could help you recognize when it's time to seek medical advice. One of the biggest misconceptions about measles is that it starts with the rash. It doesn't. In fact, by the time the rash appears, the virus has already been active inside the body for several days. That's why recognizing the early symptoms is so important. The first signs often look very similar to a common viral illness. You may develop a fever, feel unusually tired, have a runny nose, a persistent dry cough, or notice that your eyes become red, watery, and sensitive to light. At first, it's easy to mistake these symptoms for a stubborn cold, seasonal allergies, or even the flu. But unlike many common illnesses that begin improving after a day or two, measles usually follows a different pattern. Instead of getting better, many people gradually feel worse. The fever often climbs higher, fatigue becomes more noticeable, the cough becomes more persistent, and everyday activities suddenly require much more effort. Then comes the symptom most people recognize, the rash. The measles rash usually begins around the hairline or behind the ears, before spreading downward across the face, neck, chest, back, arms, and finally the legs. Doctors often describe this as a head-to-toe progression. Unlike isolated spots from some other illnesses, measles typically causes broad areas of flat red patches that may gradually merge together. Every person is different, and the appearance can vary depending on skin tone. That's one reason healthcare providers never diagnose measles based on the rash alone. Instead, they look at the entire pattern of symptoms: the fever, the cough, the red eyes, the timing, and then the appearance of the rash. Together, these clues help physicians recognize when measles should be considered. But here's something many people never hear. The rash itself isn't actually the virus attacking your skin. It's largely a sign that your immune system has recognized the infection and is fighting back. In other words, by the time the rash appears, the battle between your immune system and the virus is already well underway. Many people think of measles as just a rash. In reality, it's an infection that affects the entire body. The virus doesn't stay confined to the skin. It travels through the bloodstream and triggers an immune response that can involve several organs. The good news is that most healthy people recover completely. That's an important point. Most cases do not become life-threatening. However, doctors still take measles seriously because complications can occur, and it's difficult to predict exactly who will develop them. This is why early medical evaluation is important whenever measles is suspected. One of the biggest myths is that measles is only dangerous for children. While children are certainly vulnerable, they're not the only group doctors worry about. Several groups have a higher risk of developing complications. These include infants who are too young to receive full vaccination, pregnant women who aren't immune, people with weakened immune systems because of medical conditions or treatments, and adults who do not have immunity, including many adults over the age of 40 who may not know whether they're protected. As we age, our immune systems continue doing an incredible job, but they don't always respond to infections as efficiently as they did decades earlier. Recovery may take longer, inflammation may be more intense, and chronic health conditions can make fighting infections more challenging. That's why healthcare providers pay close attention when older adults develop symptoms consistent with measles. Fortunately, most people recover without serious problems, but it's important to understand why physicians monitor measles carefully. One of the most common complications is pneumonia, an infection that affects the lungs. When the lungs become inflamed, breathing becomes more difficult because oxygen can't move into the bloodstream as efficiently. People with pneumonia may experience persistent coughing, chest discomfort, shortness of breath, or unusual fatigue. Another concern is dehydration. High fever causes the body to lose fluids more quickly. At the same time, fatigue, sore throat, and poor appetite may make it difficult to drink enough fluids. Older adults and young children are especially vulnerable because dehydration can develop faster than many people realize. Although uncommon, doctors also watch for inflammation affecting the brain, called encephalitis. This complication is rare, but because it can be serious, symptoms such as severe headache, confusion, unusual drowsiness, seizures, or changes in consciousness require immediate medical attention. Again, these complications are not the norm, but understanding them helps explain why measles deserves respect rather than dismissal. This is another common question. The answer is no. Measles is caused by a virus, not bacteria. Antibiotics only work against bacterial infections. They don't eliminate viruses like measles. However, if someone develops a bacterial infection as a complication, such as certain types of pneumonia or an ear infection, a healthcare provider may prescribe antibiotics for that secondary infection. That's why identifying the correct cause of illness is so important. Using antibiotics when they're not needed doesn't help the body recover from measles. Instead, treatment focuses on supporting the immune system while it clears the virus naturally. Many viral illnesses can safely be managed at home, but measles is different because of how contagious it is and because complications can develop. If you develop a high fever followed by a cough, runny nose, red eyes, and especially a rash that begins on the face and spreads downward, it's important to contact your healthcare provider promptly. If you know you've recently been exposed to someone with measles, don't wait for symptoms to become severe before asking for medical advice. One important tip that many people don't realize is this: call ahead before going to a doctor's office or emergency department. Because measles spread so easily through the air, notifying the medical team before you arrive allows them to prepare appropriately and helps protect other patients who may be especially vulnerable. That simple phone call can make a significant difference. By now, you may be wondering, if I had the measles vaccine years ago, am I still protected? For many adults, the answer is yes. The measles vaccine, given as part of the MMR vaccine, which protects against measles, mumps, and rubella, has been one of the most successful vaccines ever developed. Studies have shown that 2 properly administered doses provide about 97% protection against measles. That's excellent protection, but it's important to remember that no medical intervention is 100% effective. Just like wearing a seatbelt doesn't guarantee you'll never be injured in a car accident, vaccines greatly reduce your risk without eliminating it entirely. Their purpose is to prepare your immune system before you're ever exposed to the virus. Instead of facing an unfamiliar threat, your body already knows how to recognize and fight it. And that's why vaccinated people who do become infected often experience a milder illness than those without immunity. Here's something many adults don't realize. Your year of birth can provide an important clue about your measles immunity. Adults born before 1957 are generally considered likely to have natural immunity because measles was so common during childhood before vaccines became widely available. Most children were exposed to the virus at an early age, and those who recovered usually developed long-lasting protection. For people born after that period, the situation becomes more individualized. The measles vaccine became available during the 1960s, and vaccination recommendations changed over the following years. Some adults received only 1 dose, others received 2. A small number may have received an earlier version of the vaccine that was later replaced because it wasn't as effective. That's why many adults honestly aren't sure about their vaccination history. Maybe your parents handled it decades ago. Perhaps you've moved several times and no longer have childhood medical records. Or maybe you've simply never had a reason to think about measles until now. If that sounds familiar, you're certainly not alone. This is one of the most common questions doctors hear during measles outbreaks. The answer may surprise you. For most adults, the answer is no. Many people who completed the recommended vaccination schedule do not need another measles vaccine simply because there's an outbreak somewhere in the country. However, there are situations where reviewing your vaccination history makes sense. For example, if you work in healthcare, plan to travel internationally, attend college, or live in an area experiencing an active outbreak, your healthcare provider may recommend reviewing your immunity based on current public health guidance. The key message is simple. Don't guess, check. A brief conversation with your primary care provider can usually determine whether any additional testing or vaccination is appropriate for your specific situation. Healthcare is never one size fits all. Recommendations should always be based on your individual medical history, not assumptions or internet rumors. Let's say you learn that someone you've recently been around has been diagnosed with measles. What's your next step? First, don't panic. Exposure does not automatically mean you'll become infected. Several factors influence what happens next. Your vaccination history, whether you've had measles before, how much contact you had with the infected person, and how quickly the exposure is identified. If you believe you've had significant exposure, contact your healthcare provider as soon as possible. In certain situations, vaccination shortly after exposure may still provide protection for eligible individuals. For some people who cannot receive the vaccine because of medical reasons, another treatment called immune globulin may be recommended within a limited time window. These decisions depend on your age, medical history, and the timing of the exposure. That's why early communication with a healthcare provider is so important. One more practical tip. If you develop symptoms or know you've been exposed, call your doctor's office before arriving. Because measles spreads so easily through the air, notifying the healthcare team ahead of time helps them protect other patients, especially newborns, pregnant women, and people with weakened immune systems. Sometimes one phone call can protect dozens of others. You may have seen claims online suggesting that certain vitamins, herbal remedies, or supplements can prevent or cure measles. At this time, there is no high-quality scientific evidence showing that any vitamin or supplement can replace immunity against measles. A healthy diet certainly supports overall health and helps your immune system function properly. Getting enough sleep, staying physically active, managing chronic medical conditions, and eating balanced meals all contribute to a healthier immune system. But none of these habits replace protection against measles if you are not already immune. Whenever you come across a health claim that sounds too good to be true, it's worth taking a moment to ask whether it's supported by reliable scientific evidence, not just social media posts or personal testimonials. So let's return to the question we asked at the beginning. Should adults over 40 be worried about measles? Perhaps the better word is aware. Awareness doesn't create fear. It creates preparedness. Today we've learned that measles remains one of the most contagious viruses known to medicine. We've learned that people can spread it before they even realize they're sick. We've learned that adults can develop measles if they aren't immune, and that certain groups face a higher risk of complications. And we've learned that, for most people, understanding their vaccination history is far more helpful than making assumptions. The good news is that we have effective ways to reduce the risk. Vaccination has dramatically lowered measles cases over the past several decades. Modern public health systems are equipped to identify exposures and respond quickly. And individuals can make informed decisions by simply knowing their own medical history and seeking professional advice when needed. Knowledge is one of the most powerful tools we have in protecting our health. If there's one takeaway I'd like you to remember from today's discussion, it's this. Don't assume you're protected, and don't assume you're at risk. Find out. A simple conversation with your healthcare provider can answer questions that online searches often cannot. Here at The Calming Cure, our mission is to translate complex medical research into clear, practical information that helps adults over 40 make confident decisions about their health, without fear, exaggeration, or misinformation. If you found today's video helpful, consider subscribing and turning on notifications so you won't miss future evidence-based health guides designed specifically for you. And before you go, I'd love to hear from you. Before watching this video, did you know whether you were protected against measles, or do you plan to check your vaccination history after today? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your questions often inspire our future videos, and your experiences may help others in our community as well. Thank you for watching. Stay informed, stay healthy, and I'll see you in the next video.